Hello, welcome back to The Future of Photography. My name is Chris Marquardt, and with me are these two gentlemen. I'm trying to show this on the camera, but it's not really working. So,
No,
yeah.
over here.
Adrian, Jeremiah, how are you guys doing?
Very
As
well.
well as can be expected under the global circumstances.
Right, I should stop asking that in the beginning.
You should do, yeah,
I'd say,
possibly.
Pretty good.
Okay, sounds good. So Imar is busy. She has a let's just add this in here because she asked us to mention it. She has a project on the weekend, which means
It's more than a project.
it's a bit more than a project. It's the Arts Festival 2020 in Clonmel Junction, which is from July 4th to the 12th, and she had some part in one of the performances with some of her art, and she's there to organize and stuff. We will put a link in the show notes because it is going on for a while, and a lot of the things that come out of that will be available later.
Yeah, very definitely a multi-art festival. There's music, there's sort of painting type art. There's I think there may be some photography, but there's all sorts of stuff going on. And Ema, I'd imagine at this point is horribly out of breath, running around trying to organise everything because she runs one of the venues for it. So
she was even hard to get hold of before this episode when we started discussing what we wanted to record.
Indeed.
So, anyway, Adrian, you prepared this episode, so let me hand this off to you.
Yes. Very generous of you to say I prepared. But I am reacting. You know, you see this a lot on YouTube, don't you? Like photographer reacts to, or filmmaker reacts to. So I'm reacting today, and hopefully the three of us can react and think about what this means for the future of licensing of photography, or is it? Because there's a question mark over that even. So as you do, I was cruising the interwebs the other day and picked up an article that I found on Petapixel, but followed the chain, and this takes us to Getty Images. Now, slight tangent before we dive into the story. I have a bit of motor racing in my history, and so part of my newsfeed is all about motor racing. And anybody that is interested in the sport will have noticed that this year there's been a huge shift, for obvious reasons, towards esports racing.
Isn't NASCAR doing all their races on computers right now?
Yeah, and there's been some Formula One stuff, Formula E, which is the electric open wheeler racing, which is great if you ever get the chance to see it, and lots more as well. And you've got real racing drivers. I say real racing drivers who are used to driving cars on racetracks with engines in them, racing against esports racing drivers, and they have big, hydraulic chairs and lots of monitors and stuff like that, and presumably very reliable internet connections as well.
That helps.
And my news feed has gradually shifted from real racing into this whole esports world, and all of the pundits and the commentators and the broadcasters, they're all doing it. So you can watch online now, streaming. In fact, I watched a bit of one a few weeks ago from Spa, which is a very famous racing circuit in the east of Belgium. Probably, Chris, you live nearer to it than I do.
Yeah, but I'm not into racing, so I wouldn't be able to tell you anything.
It's an amazing place. I have actually raced at Spa in the rain, and it is truly a horrifying but immensely exciting thing to do. So I watched an esports race from there. So this is from the esports rendition of the Spa circuit, and they even had weather, they had rain, and you know what, with real commentators, it's very exciting. I guess Chris, you haven't watched it. Jeremiah, have you?
They've broadcast this on ESPN here.
Yes.
ESPN, which is the big sporting network here, which has not that many sports live to broadcast, and they have been showing esport NASCAR races that I did tune in for one, and it was dazzlingly similar to a real race in terms of how they managed the kind of virtual cameras, like you said, the weather, Of course, it was a lot safer when some of the cars went
Yes.
over the wall.
Sure.
There were no reported injuries.
And they someone gets stuck in the hydraulic chair. They and looking at what's happened over the last, I don't know, 10 years in video gaming. I mean, graphics are very, very realistic now, and you have the physics of the whole thing are so well simulated now that it is almost like the real thing. Other than you're not smelling the gasoline and the noise is different, and
Yeah.
just
So
not
it's-
being there physically is of course different, but the actual driving is must be very similar to the
Well,
real deal.
having done a bit of both myself, it's more realistic than you might think. So, a few miles down the road from me is a place where you can go and you can sit in these hydraulic chairs and you can do the racing. And it is very physical. The chairs bash you around. I came out covered in bruises the time I did it, which I guess is even more hard than real racing, because in a real race car, you're strapped in with a 6-point harness. You can't move a muscle. But it is interesting what's going on here. They even did the 24 hours of Le Mans this year was an esports race.
Yeah.
And I've been to Le Mans, clearly not as a driver, but I've been. It's an enormous festival, Le Mans. It's a fantastic event. There's nothing quite like the sound of a Corvette at dawn. You can hear the Corvettes from pretty much anywhere in the circuit. So there's a lot of similarities, but my feed has been filling up with this stuff, and of course this is a tangent. I said it was going to be quick. It's not, but that's okay because I could talk about motor racing all day.
Where does the photography come in?
Well, where does the photography come in? Well, okay, so we've talked on this show about digital photography inside games, and Jeremiah is a practitioner. But I was a bit surprised to read the other day that Getty Images is now licensing in-game photography. I don't know whether I should have air quotes around that, but in-game photography
That's what it's called.
from one of the leading games, a game called Gran Turismo, which has been around for donkey's years in various different incarnations. And actually, Getty would have then the rights to those images and the rights to sell those images to whomsoever would want to report on it. And I thought it's quite astonishing. Who'd want that?
I can't understand how you could actually license an image with any expectation of exclusivity of that image, given that your kids could probably take an image as good as what you've just paid for the license in your basement, and that's it. Who owns that image on that track of that car going around a curve?
Well, apparently Getty Images do now, because they've licensed it. So let's be just a bit clear to narrow it down a little bit, because these are live sporting events that it relates to. And according to what I've read, the Getty photographers, again, I think we need a new noun, but the Getty photographers get special access. So whether that's in software or hardware, I don't know, but they can go places in the in-game domain that your average punter can't go, which I guess is very much like being at a real racetrack. Because for anybody that's been, if you go just as a general admission, you're often behind fences and you have to take your photographs through fences. Whereas if you get a press
So
card,
you can go
wherever
into
you
the
like.
virtual pit
Yeah.
and interact with the artificial humanoids and shoot over their shoulders of the cars in competition. And that gives you an edge.
A phone
It
is
is-
ringing.
I'm sorry.
So let me jump in here and ask something. So if you are so let's talk about repeatability of photos here for a second, because I think that is one thing. In a digital domain, you could theoretically take the exact by the pixel exact photo from the exact if you have a replay of this game somewhere, you could be at the exact virtual position with the exact same camera settings at the exact millisecond and take that same photo. When you
I
are
think so.
when you are 10 photographers in a pit or 20 photographers in a pit, very close to each other, and you take the same shot with the same lens, the same camera in real life, you would take very, very, very similar photos where it might even be very hard to distinguish between them because they've been taken at the same time from virtually the same spot. So the question is, where's the difference?
Well, I think you've just hit it on the head. I think it's a fool's errand to try and actually put a value on the license. I think the license, if it's not just a way of promoting the brand for a inexpensive license, that's one thing. So that there's that, the official popcorn of NASCAR. What does it mean? But it's a branding exercise because in those particular venues of electronic racing, you're dealing with a very, very fixed track, and you're dealing with cars that are moving in a very specific direction. And so you're right, Chris, when you land on a certain angle of view and adjust your virtual camera optically to match, I don't think there's anything that prevents you from screenshotting that very, very image. What you do with it is a little different, because if you take that and post it, nobody's going to really jump on you. However, if you took that image without a license and used it on a cereal box, I think that there is an argument somewhere from someone to identify that as an unlicensed image if there is a way to recognize that, which there could be in the pixel construction or in the specificity of car design, to say, no, these are unlicensed and they're used for profit. So they do belong to us. It's a little bit different in terms of the copyright, because here in the US, we have something called fair use, and it's still a very gray area. The law indicates that if you take an image that is taken from basically it's code, because a game is written in code. It's not an actual race. The asphalt is not something that people constructed. It's probably constructed using photogrammetry and then applied to the meshes to simulate. And so with the rain and everything else, who owns the asphalt images that are applied in that? Well, no one. So if you get into a court battle, which is basically, if I took the race itself and used it for promotion, well, that's clearly an infringement. But if I take an image, still image, and convert it and change it and make it my own, in other words, transform it significantly, the law states that I own the copyright. Now, a jury would be kind of between a rock and a hard place. And there have been many court cases where the jurors found both for the artist and both for the plaintiff, being a corporation, or another artist whose work was appropriated. It's not clear. It's not cut and dry. It's very, very instinctive. The danger, of course, is that you go and you do it and you get sued, and you can be fined for each image. So defending it becomes an issue. Getting you can get insurance for IP, and insurance for IP is quite expensive. It's a percentage of what the value of the potential up on the lawsuit would be. So copyright is an amorphous issue in online image making. And so for Getty to kind of jump into this is going to be very interesting to see if there's anything brought legally against someone who goes, well, I just made that image.
That's incredible, isn't it? I mean, so okay, so let's assume that for the people that have licensed the imagery, the Gran Turismo, the people that are letting Getty do this, let's assume that they have all the rights, and that there's no programmer going to come out of the woodwork and say, "Hey, I designed that fence." Then you've got a bit of specificity around the live events, haven't you? Because I think many of these images could be recreated after the fact, but if they can somewhat constrain the angle of view between your average, I guess there's streaming, so you'd have to be able to protect the system from unauthorized access whilst you were doing a live race, but that's done at the network level. Then you'd have to make sure that only your official photographers had access to make those images. And then whilst I have some sympathy to say that you could theoretically recreate the image pixel by pixel, I don't think anybody could drive that precisely. And so, in the real world, what happens far more is there's far more mistakes, and you'll come around one lap and you'll be 3 feet to the left of where you were the last lap, and you'll miss your braking point by 3 meters or whatever. Like that's what happens in the real world. And then of course the more valuable images are often of racing incidents, which may or may not end in actual crashes, but somebody having a spin at some point that's going to be a more interesting image than somebody not having a spin. It's no coincidence that a lot of people flock to the same places in racetracks when they want to watch. If you're at Le Mans, you always watch the start from Tertre Rouge. Because if you're at Brands Hatch, you always watch the start from Halewoods. It's that kind of thing. But I'm interested in what the future of the imagery is here, because Getty doesn't exactly have a great reputation, does it, for protecting people's imagery?
Well,
in the past they've reduced the price to zero for images that they only have representation on, and the artists have been left with nothing.
Well, that's why I say that I think that this could be instinctively a branding situation rather than a money situation. Also, I think that what it does is it creates whether it's fear or opportunity, depending on which side of the fence you're sitting on. So it's putting a stake in the ground and saying no one but us can sell or dispense or license any images from this race, or is it the game? Because that's not clear. Except us.
Here's one detail I'm not clear about, and that is are only the images licensed that are made by photographers who have that special access to the pit, or are any in-game images, even from regular players or watchers, do they fall under this Getty clause? I don't know. I haven't looked that deep into it, but
it's not clear.
To me, it's not clear. It might be clear somewhere
to the lawyers.
No, even to the lawyers, it's probably not clear. One step back to the term of photography, by the way. I mean, the question here is, and Adrian, you asked this earlier, if we should even call this photography. What is the difference between the real photography and that in-game photography?
Just to answer one question, going back to the press release, it says Getty Images will serve as the exclusive photographic agency of the FIA certified Gran Turismo Championships. So it is very much about the events, and the FIA, of course, being the global governing body of much of motorsport, including Formula One and other things. So I think there is a restriction on that. It's not the whole of the game itself.
So if you were going to license this, you'd be best off licensing a specific moment unique to that particular race, which demonstrates your exclusivity to it and gives you some value add that others could not get. Though, I would say, as an observer of the race, certainly in playback, I could freeze and snap that. Maybe not from the same venue. I don't know, or the same angle of
or
view.
the same camera points. Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is tricky. I mean, you've got to figure they've got a whole bunch of footage they're capturing, like a real world event. As to the photography,
by the way, would it matter to those licensing of it in terms of what their use would be?
That's interesting. As to the real world photography versus the in-game photography, I would just say the in-game photography is going to be way easier. So a few years back now, maybe 7 or 8 years, 7 or 8 years ago, I
disagree.
I disagree.
We both disagree.
Okay, so let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story then. So about 7 or 8 years ago, a friend of mine was racing in the Silverstone 24 Hours, which is it's a multi-class race, and he was in a team where you just simply go, buy a seat for the race, what I did is I went and did the 24-hour race as the photographer for that team, and that was really, really hard. I was all over the place, and many of these racetracks, Silverstone is no exception. They are big old airfields. The space you have to cover, the ground you have to cover is enormous. I think
physically, I'm completely with you. I mean, sitting in your chair in front of a screen, pushing the mouse around, that is definitely physically easier. It's also less dangerous to do this from your chair as opposed to being in the pit where a flying tire could behead you. Yes. There are definitely differences there, but the actual photography, the act of framing a shot and deciding where from to shoot it and what moment and what settings at to get what you want artistically, I don't see a big difference there or any difference there. It kind of depends on the tools, but even then, as a real photographer with a real camera, you might have different tools than the guy next to you. That might be a camera that has different settings and different possibilities. So
yeah. So in the technique of capturing the image, perhaps, but in the actual planning and execution, it is very different. So you need to know, you need to talk to the team to know when your car is coming in for a pit stop. You need to have your camera. You need to have your camera view. You need to make friends with the mechanics because they'll tell you to get out of the way. And if you've got any lighting or anything like that, you've got to make sure that's all arranged in the right place long before the car ever arrives. You can't just simply pause the action and then rotate your camera around the scene and play with the lighting. I mean, I'd say it's very different. But Jeremiah looks like he's got something he wants to say as well.
I want to go back to the fundamental question of, is digital art that uses the photographic sensibility photography? Now, as someone who is deep in this and does a lot of this kind of work, whether it's in-game photography, wherein I do make choices of lenses and light and angle and composition in capture, and then I take it out and I process it no different than I would when I shoot with my film or digital cameras. It's the same process. And my output, which, as you know, I'm very into printing, so the output is printed very specifically. The transformation of the original game to the final print is absolutely, it's so vast that, and the way I approach it is so in many ways committed to not engaging in the gameplay, but really in the environment in which the game is played. So I use a lot of combinations of AI backgrounds. I don't reveal that much. It's very, very kind of impressionistic, and yet the images tend to look very realistic. And anyone's interested can go to my website and take a peek. But once you get into the kind of world of sport photography, it becomes a little bit different because each game is different. So I would have a very, very difficult time screen grabbing an image that you screen grabbed and match it. And ditto with my own work, I would challenge anyone to recreate the image that I did, just in terms of the randomness, all of the elements that came together to make that one image at that one time. Because though I'm in control of the camera, the AI is something that I move around, and I can adjust it only to a certain extent. No different than if I was walking on the street and doing street photography and I moved around a subject, or I asked somebody if they wouldn't mind turning to the light. And so there is that as well, not to mention my choice of location and who designed the building behind them and what time of day it was. So there's a lot of similarities, but I have argued the point about photography and digital art. And I could argue both sides of the equation, because I say it's photography just because that's where I've come from. I'm used to that. My mental process when I do these captures is very much the same as when I walk on the street with my camera. Where it starts to get different is when I start to build my own environments, and I build these environments and light them specifically to capture them. And then I feel I'm moving more into the realm of a digital artist who uses digital photography to capture a certain element of the work. But I think at the end of the day, it's all moot, because I was online the other day. Photo LA had a session, basically a 2-day virtual session with virtual panels and virtual galleries. And one of the panels was in-game photography. And I got a chance to kind of speak and discuss this with a lot of people who are very active in it. And there's no consensus as to whether it should be called photography or not. At the end of the day, if it looks like a photograph and quacks like a photograph, it's a photograph. That's where I come out.
Well, maybe this.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's tricky. It is tricky to know, and that may play into the future of what classes as licensing, and then one day that may become enshrined in case law, which may be different in Germany from the USA from the UK. Mm-hmm. You know, because the case law differs
certainly,
especially with regard to culture. That culture informs case law eventually, doesn't it? So the equipment. You kind of threw down last week the new Photoshop camera, right? So that Photoshop camera, the default for some reason is set on this cartoon mode when I open it. Now, but if I take a picture and show it to you of you as a cartoon character, is that photography? Does that look like a photograph? Well, no, it looks like a comic book drawing. That's always a good. There's no hard and fast rules for that, though, because as I look at the wall in front of me, right, I can see a cyanotype print of a digital photograph. I think I can see some instant film. I can see digital prints of 35mm film. I can see all sorts of things just right in front of me right now. The cyanotype clearly as a print has to be somewhere in the grey murky area about whether it's a photograph or not, even though the starting point was a photograph. So
are photograms photographs?
Well, so is it?
I don't think we'll solve this here.
No, we're not going to solve this. So let's think about the future. So let's think about the future. I think it's a really interesting twist. that Getty are now doing this. Do I think this would have happened without COVID if 2020 was just another normal year? No, I don't, because although esports is interesting, it's not as, I don't think it's as monetizable for imagery as real world sport, if that's a term I can use. For some reason, I'm reminded of an episode of Buck Rogers, by which I mean the 1970s TV series where Buck goes to the Olympics and there's no audience. It's all done in like a sports hall, and then applause is piped in, which is perilously close to what's happening at least in the UK Premiership soccer at the moment.
I've heard a podcast that is a BBC show, the Infinite Monkey Cage, and they had an episode where they had an actual audience back home, like us in front of a camera, and they were feeding their applause back into the show, because that's usually a show done on a stage. So
Monkey Cage is a great show, and I know, Chris, you've been a fan for years, as I have. The whole of the current series, which is currently in production, is with a piped-in audience who are listening live,
a real live
audience listening in, but from their homes, and and applauding, and they feed the applause that's coming in down the pipes. So it is weird. So it is. We do live in interesting times, and this is an interesting twist, I think. Real world sports is getting going again, especially motor racing. The NASCAR's already up and running. The F1 starts soon, and any other number of things. I mean, yes, they'll be doing it to an extent behind closed doors, but there will be real cars racing around tracks and the thrill of that. So I've got to ask the question, in 6 months' time, will anyone care about this? Will Getty Images just have said, okay, fine, there's no value in this, and they'll put it all out on their stock agency website for free or for, cents or pence, per image? I don't know. Do I think that I can sell images that I make in a game? Probably not, because there's no real racing drivers at the other end of an internet pipe. I don't know, but I'm interested in maybe to close us out, Jeremiah, your view of what this means for you personally, and maybe the commercial future of your in-game work.
The complications are as yet unknown, because I don't think we've had a major test case in the courts, certainly not here, that really kind of defines what specifically the law is or should be. And there's a reason for that. Keep it gray until there's more or less experimenting on both sides to see what value or lack thereof kind of engages in the economy with these, final products. So I think there's a lot unknown. Where we're going is certainly, I believe, digital art, and we've talked about fake news and all of those. And now there's kind of ways to falsify voices even and imitate that. I mean, so we're moving to a slippery slope of both creativity in terms of manifesting reality as something that is not, or enhancing reality with AR and VR. And until we work out what the parameters of who owns what, is it the publisher? Is it the game creators? Is it the artist within? What is an artist who creates a character? What is their contract with the game publisher? Do they own everything? Probably. But there may be somebody very specific who has a character that they license for the game. So within the game, how does that transfer? There's a lot of legal issues that are yet undescribed. And what I've been able to ascertain is the companies are very laissez-faire as long as they feel the users or the abusers, depending on which side you sit, are not making a ton of money on it. Now, this gets really kind of a little more crazy when you start to look at YouTube and some of these playing games for
the streamers, yeah.
yes, like whether it's Twitch or YouTube, etc. And they're drawing huge audiences, and they're making many millions of dollars doing it. At some point, it feels to me that the game companies are going to go, listen, we have no problem with you doing it, but we are now your partner.
Yes, yeah.
I think,
and that's kind of where I think it will go.
yeah, and I think wherever it will go, I don't think it will go away. I think the pandemic has taught us all that is an option, because a lot of people were not aware of that. They didn't know. They weren't used to seeing more virtual things, but now this is happening. So I'm sure that there will be more of that, even when everything kind of goes back to normal. I don't think it will go away. I think it's something to stay.
No, and in terms of the future of photography, I think that one of the reasons I brought up that Photoshop camera is creating artificial looks or taking artificial environments and making them real. Some of these could happen in camera, some of these in computer, on your phone. However, there's a melding and a fusion of that, which is going to be both hardware and software based, that will allow us more control over the images that we intend to produce. And I think I can safely say that these things are an exciting, albeit somewhat confusing element now, but I think it's exciting to know that creative beings, artists, will have more and more control over an imagined image as much as they may have control over capturing a live image. And I think that's exciting for the kind of images that we may see in the future.
I think that's a nice way to close out the conversation, Jeremiah, to see the positive in it. It is exciting. Who knows where it'll take us? But it's and maybe there'll certainly be a lot of false starts, I guess, and dead ends. But overall, things will evolve and continue to evolve. And we are a show called The Future of Photography, after all. So we should probably be embracing this stuff rather than rejecting it, shouldn't we?
Very true.
Okay, on to picks of the week then. Hey, picks of the week. Chris, what's your pick of the week?
I brought you something. When you click on the link, you'll get a German website, because it's something that a German university just talked about and brought out. And it's an anti-grad filter that is digital. So you have a filter that you can electronically modify in terms of the gradient and where it is and how it's rotated and so on.
Can they do that? They can do that to optical quality now, can they?
I think they can, and they're doing this by a special coating. It's not even LCD. I think it's a special coating on top, and I don't know how it works, and I don't know how far they are. But there's a good chance that at one point we will have an anti-grad, and I hope they can also change the shape of that gradient, because whenever you are in the mountains, you don't typically have a V-shaped anti-grad with you. So yeah.
But by the way, this may be very much. Has anybody experienced the 3M translucent, opaque, transparent glass that they sell?
Yes, in a scary way. Yes. So we were on a family trip somewhere, and it was only a one-nighter. So we were all staying in the one hotel room, me, my wife, and my kids. And the bathroom had a glass wall into the shower.
And that was a switchable one?
And we were like, wow, how on earth are we going to deal with that then? We're going to have to ask them to move rooms and stuff like that. And it turned that then one of us, I forget who, spotted there was a little switch on the wall by the side of the bath, and you pressed the switch and the whole glass went opaque and everything was okay after that.
So this may, this technology may be more sophisticated in terms of grads and all of that, but I would hope I can see it. I want it bad.
Yeah, and I hope this switchable glass will never be in public bathrooms.
Indeed.
Okay, next. Who's next?
I'll go next.
Okay, Jeremiah. Sure.
Just because we'll let you wrap up the show with your pick too. I've picked, in terms of today's discussion, something called Pixie. PIXSY, which is all about finding and fighting image theft.
There we go.
So it's about uploading your image, and it basically, I'm imagining that they use a bot technology to kind of move through, identify all of the salient points of your image, and identify it as your own. I do have a very close friend who's been building a something similar, but that uses embedded information in the image and a registration, global registration, so that you can actually register each image in a database that secures it. So you can actually take an image and decode it and say, no, this is a registered image. But I think these kinds of call it services, as we get into the more kind of gray areas of who owns what and how this works, will be both used and abused. So that's my pick.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, I have. First of all, we should mention EMA's event again. The Clonmel Junction Arts Festival 2020. Loads of stuff going on there. That's a hyper local recommendation. And sadly, none of us will get to go because.
But a lot of the content will be on virtual platforms later on, so we can still check back on some things.
Yes. Okay. So second recommendation for me today is actually an audio manufacturer rather than anything to do with photography. I realized today, I should have realized this ages ago, that my favorite earbuds actually are not just entirely Bluetooth. You can unplug the actual earbuds themselves and plug them into a cable. And that reminded me that actually I'm a real fan of RHA Audio.
I've never heard of them.
They are based in Glasgow. And they do some really nice audio design kit. So I'll put a link in the show notes. Funnily enough, it was my wife that put me onto this company because some years ago we were in Glasgow Airport and she bought some headphones, and then found out after that they were a local company, which she was great. She was happy to support a local company. And then I was so impressed with them, I bought some myself sometime later. But very, very nice audio products.
I like the design on their products. And by the way, this is not a sponsored.
No, it's not. No, I am merely a satisfied customer and user of their products.
I like the look of their products.
Yeah, they're good and they sound good as well. And one of the things that one of these people who, when you buy earbuds, usually they just fall out of my ears. But these they sell with. Mine came with. Look, I can hold it up on the camera. I had something like 20 different types of shapes of earbuds, including some made of memory foam. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried memory foam for earbuds, but it's awesome. You just squeeze it, stick it in, and it pops back out. It's a bit inexperienced. It's a bit like the ones you get on airplanes, but those are single use, whereas these ones will go on for ages and ages. So that's my second, and I'm going to sneak in a third one that isn't even in the show notes, which is that because lockdown has gone on longer than I thought, I bought a Switch this week, a Nintendo Switch, and I'm not an avid gamer, but kids game and I can play with them and stuff like that. The Switch, the Joy-Cons, as they call them, the little controllers, they have a dedicated hardware button for capturing an in-game image.
Ooh.
Now, Nintendo clearly not known for their photorealistic games.
So are we going to see a whole bunch of Zelda photos from you now?
Yeah, quite possibly. But in terms of
matches,
in terms of raw capture, I mean, and Jeremiah's process post process, I guess, for processing for post capture, actually the ability to just capture anything you see as you go by.
Is that a screenshot button essentially?
It is basically a screenshot button, but it takes away all of the metadata for the game.
So you get a clean shot. Okay.
Yeah, you get a clean shot.
I'm going to guess it's relatively low quality JPEGs that you get out of it.
I haven't checked. I haven't taken any out yet.
That's your homework for next time then.
Yeah, the device itself is capable of 1080p. But so
Yeah,
so in
but
photographic
pulling it-
terms, they're not going to be high resolution. But
Right. That's the trick, is trying to get a good solid PNG file out of a capture that could be converted into, Photoshop or TIFFs or whatever.
yeah. Well, I'll let you know how I get on with that one then. So, well, there you go. That's it for today, I think. This has been show 138 of TFOP now. Of the future of photography. And you can get in touch with us on the internet at TFOP now, TFOPNOW on Twitter, Instagram, or go get the whole of the back catalogue at thefutureofphotography.com. As always, it has been an honour and a privilege to speak with you all, and we'll be back next week. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.